Live free. Live free. Let us say that continuously up to this primary, because one of the great blessings we have and one of the biggest responsibilities we hold is to help pick the next president. We do it better than anyone, and there's a reason why. We don't listen to the media. We don't watch the commercials. There's two things all we ever ask for presidential candidates. You meet me, and you ask my vote. That's all you got to do. Two things. And if you look at all the great states, and New Hampshire's the best, there's a couple that are kind of close to us. And Pennsylvania is one of them. Pennsylvania is one of them for many great reasons. They understand sacrifice. July 3rd and July 4th, during the Civil War, brothers fought brothers. And it was the greatest loss of human life in any battle America had ever experienced. And in that soil, people of Pennsylvania understood what can happen if we deny liberty to certain people. And Abraham Lincoln appeared there very shortly after that and gave a great speech, Gettysburg Address. And as I learned this week, all children in Taiwan have to know this speech. Kids in Taiwan have to know it, and our kids don't. But in the end of that speech, he goes, the last full measure of devotion. The last full measure of devotion is represented by the plaque behind here of the great New Hampshire soldiers who've lost their life. Yes. And when we think about that last full measure of devotion, people, us here and other people, go forth and speak for us to respect that last full measure of devotion. This next gentleman I'm going to introduce you to is thinking about, hopefully, asking for your vote to be president. He comes from a great state of Pennsylvania. And the time that he served as a senator, there's one thing that we can all be proud of as New Hampshireites, because he has that New Hampshireite spirit. He led. If you make Keith Overman's worst list, you're okay in my book. And if you make it more than once, you're great in my book. And this next gentleman, no matter what it was, no matter how the bullets flew, no matter how the insults came, did the same thing as Rich Ashew. Didn't look in the mirror and say, what can I do for myself? He stood there and said, what can I do for my country? And in that, what can I do for my children? And he took some heat, folks. And he's here today because what I've decided to do, because by the power invested in me as one of the few people born in New Hampshire, born and bred, I'm going to make him an official New Hampshireite today. And because of that, it's now baptism under fire, folks. Big round of applause for former Senator RickSantorum.
Wow. That's awesome. Thank you so much, Jeff. Thank you for that terrific introduction. And first and foremost, thank you for being out here. I've been telling folks, I've been doing a lot of Tea Party rallies for the past year and a half, and after the last election, which was such a great election, and the Tea Party was so critical, I mean, absolutely essential. One of the things I've been saying every place I go is it is vitally important that the Tea Party is not seen as a one-trick pony. Because what happened in the last election was truly a transformational event, I believe, in American history. But if you don't follow up, if you don't maintain the intensity, I always use the example when I was elected to Congress. I got elected to Congress as a first-term congressman, and I would go and I'd meet some of these older members, and they basically wouldn't pay much attention to you. And I finally talked to one of the old guys, and I said, what is this attitude a little bit about freshman members? The guy said to me, you know what, son? He said, anybody can get elected to Congress. He said, you can run, and you can run against the other guy and make, and condemn him. He said, anybody can get elected. He says, we'll start talking to you when you can stand up and fight on what you did and get reelected. And in some respects, that's the message for the Tea Party. It's easy to go out and say, these guys are bad, and condemn the other side for doing bad things. It's harder and this is why it's important to understand what's going on in here in New Hampshire, in the legislature, and around the legislatures in the country. It's important to be able to come back and say, here's what we did, here's what we believed in, here are the changes we made to our country. Here in New Hampshire, I know there's state senators and legislators here who stood up and are doing the tough things because you're there behind them. You're there behind them. They're making big changes. They're getting our fiscal house in order. They're making the changes that are necessary to get our country back on the right path. And they're fighting, and they're getting beat up. Jeff mentioned how much I got beat up. It's true. And our folks, the folks that you're backing, are getting beat up by the mainstream media. Look at what Scott Walker's doing out in Wisconsin, and John Kasich in Ohio, and all of these places. Those are the high-profile ones. But it's happening everywhere where Tea parties were successful in electing conservatives in office, in the state level. And so it is vitally important for us to be able to go back out in this next election and have another wave election. You will not only elect more conservatives to the House and to the Senate, you'll not only elect hopefully a new president in 2012, but what you will do, yes, but what you will do is you will fundamentally change the way America looks at its government again. And so I know this is preaching to the choir. You're here. I understand that. But sometimes the choir has to go out and sing solos. And you folks who are here, who are passionate, you need to go out and continue to keep this movement alive. This is the most important election in your lifetime. We dedicate this board back here to the men and women who have suffered and sacrificed, who died here in New Hampshire. And I know there are a lot of veterans here in the crowd, and we thank you. You're just amazing patriots for your service. But what America needs more than ever right now are not men and women in uniform to fight the battles around the world, but men and women who are going to put the uniform of a citizen on and fight the battle for freedom right here in America.
Yeah.
So that is my challenge to you. And here in New Hampshire, well, as Jeff was just saying, you're special. Now, I know that because this is my 14th trip to New Hampshire, and I am now an honorary New Hampshire, and I appreciate that. Thank you very much, Jeff. You are special because you're first. You're the first in the nation primary, and you have a special responsibility to this country. We must replace Barack Obama, as we said, but we must have a candidate who is going to have the ability to go out there and go toe-to-toe with a very tough candidate in a very tough environment being created by a media, and a candidate who will have $1 billion. So you have the responsibility, and it is a responsibility. I always call New Hampshire, when I talk about it across the country, I say New Hampshire is the human resource department for the country when it comes to interviewing and analyzing presidents. Well, you have a special responsibility to pick a candidate who will do something that's vitally important, and that is energize people like you all across America. America is a conservative, people say a center-right country. Every survey that's done, 40% of Americans say they're conservative, 20% say they're liberal. We have an absolute clear advantage. Yet, somehow or another, that doesn't get reflected. Why? Why? I would argue why is because a lot of our folks are very complacent and don't come out and vote. They don't believe. They don't believe that the people they're voting for are going to do the things that they say they're going to do. Right now, look at what's going on in this budget battle in Washington, D.C. I know there are people here saying, well, those guys in Washington, right, who didn't stand up and fight. Who didn't fight for what we wanted. Well, I was one of those folks complaining too. I said that what John Boehner and the House Republicans should have been doing was fighting about principle, standing up and fighting to repeal Obamacare.
Yeah.
If you want to do something, and how do you de facto repeal Obamacare? You shut down the implementation of it. There's $100 billion sitting in a budget in Washington, D.C. that the House of Representatives should draw a line and say we are not passing a debt ceiling until that that money is repealed for implementing an unconstitutional program that the American public is absolutely against. So I understand your frustration when you look at what's going on in Washington. I understand it. But we have to turn that frustration into energy. You have to turn it into an energy that says we are going to commit ourselves to electing someone, to nominating someone who we can trust, who will do what they say they're going to do. Someone who has a background of standing up and leading in good times and in bad. On unpopular times and popular times, on national security issues, on economic issues, on fiscal issues, on social conservative issues, someone who's across the board, consistent, principled, and is not afraid to lose, standing up for those principles. Live free or die, death, including political death, is not the worst thing that can happen to you. Okay? Ladies and gentlemen, I defeated a Democratic incumbent when I ran for the House of Representatives in a 60% Democratic district. I won re-election and scared out another Democratic incumbent after my district was redistricted into a 72% Democratic district, and I won that. I ran in a state of Pennsylvania that had almost 1 million more Democrats than Republicans against an incumbent Democrat who had just won election by 10 points over the sitting former governor of Pennsylvania, and I defeated that Democrat. I've won elections in tough races, and I've stood up, and as a conservative in Pennsylvania, we elect Republicans in Pennsylvania, but we rarely elect conservatives in Pennsylvania. I was the first conservative elected in Pennsylvania in over 50 years. And I didn't flinch. I was called everything you could possibly imagine to be called, because I stood up and fought on conservative issue after conservative issue across the board. I was referred so much, my kids when they read the paper thought my first name was Ultra. Because that's how the media painted me. This guy's so out of the mainstream. No, I was consistent in supporting the Constitution of our country and limited government, which is what made this country the greatest country in the history of the world. So I challenge all of you. I challenge all of you to be a good human resource department for the country, for the Republican Party, and more importantly for the country. And nominating someone who's got the passion, the conviction, the energy, the drive, who maybe has defeated a Democratic incumbent or two, who's taken the lead on issues across the board and has been fearless in fighting for what you believe in. And if you do that, and you elect someone, I'll add one more important thing. Ever since the age of television, in a presidential election, the best communicator has won the election. Now you can say, well, that's a sad thing, but it's a true thing. Unless we elect someone who can look into that camera and communicate and touch the people on the other side of that camera, who can stand up toe-to-toe with somebody else, who is without a teleprompter, who can stand up, those aren't teleprompters, by the way, neither is that. Someone who can stand up with a very good communicator, with the President of the United States, and go toe-to-toe and take him on, then we're not going to win this election. So I just ask for you to give consideration to make sure that we elect somebody and nominate someone, and New Hampshire can do it, that's going to take this message, energize our base, and transform our country. God bless you.
So he accepted being now an official member, a New Hampshireite, but he forgot to ask what details that is, so let's kind of explain it to him. The first thing is that an official New Hampshireite has to know what Poutine is. So for those of you who don't know what it is, you got to get up here and talk to me about it. So if you haven't had that yet, right, Ovid? If you haven't had Poutine, then you need to work on that as well. The other thing is this, you got to drink Moxie. So if you haven't tried Moxie yet, You got to see it, make sure it's make sure in your hands. There's one thing I want to talk to you about, Senator GSPLPAC, before I introduce the next guest, is this. When he found out that you guys were going to be here, he was not scheduled to be in the state today. He was here yesterday and was going to leave. He changed his plans to come here and be with you today. And for those of you who know, as all of you were here today, a time away from your family, and his family's big, is a sacrifice that sometimes is hard. So we appreciate that you did do that for us, and thank you very much. 7 kids. Rich, he's got you beat.